You're listening to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host, John Wood Jr. And joined by my much adored, much respected co-host, April Lawson, Director of Debates for Braver Angels. April, how you doing today?
Wonderful. How about you, John?
I'm doing good. I always feel good when I get a chance to talk to my favorite people, right? And
Absolutely.
That's right. And in addition to yourself, I have one of my other favorite people, one of our other favorite people on the call today, author, educator, activist, a person who's affected the world and been a force for good in many a way, Mr. Tim Shriver. Tim, how you doing, brother? Welcome to the Braver Angels podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. It's an honor to be with you both and to be on this journey together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we are on a journey together too, and that is well said to kick us off. The thing that we all have in common in this moment in time is that we are all of us in our own different ways, and you, Tim, blazing a trail as you always have, working towards creating a society that is moved in a spirit of goodwill towards solving the problems that affect, I think, people on the levels where it most matters. And so I want to jump right into talking about your work of late, the work of Unite, and the book that you have recently authored, A Call to Unite. The Call to Unite, Voices of Hope and Awakening. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to with Unite the Movement, and tell us a little bit about what the book is, what the book shines a light on.
Yeah. Well, thanks, John, for having me, and thanks for mentioning the book. I want to make one correction out of the gate, though, because it's an important one. I edited the book together with my colleague, Tom Roschert.
Right.
And the reason I make the distinction is because the book has over 100 contributions from every model of diversity in our country, I dare say. We have Native voices, we have Black voices, we have white voices, Republican voices, Democratic voices, young, old, rich, poor, ex-presidents of the United States, ex-convicts who have spent time in solitary. They're all in the book. And that's important because I think sometimes we get the idea that the voices trying to bring us together, the voices trying to find a path to justice and peace that travels the road of dignity and I dare say compassion, that those voices are small, they're insignificant, they're not out there. We don't hear them. Wrong. They are out there. They're out there in large numbers. They may not be out there in squeaky loud numbers, but we are out there in large numbers looking for an alternative path. So this is a book I think of as almost a companion for all of us because so many people contributed so generously to it. You can find people in the book who are teaching their own version of practices of inner compassion. Some people have never heard the term self-compassion, but people like Amy Grant and Jewel and Dr. Rita Walker talk about how do we develop our own inner mental health as a way of solving problems. You can't solve or seek compassion in others unless you first feel it in yourself. And then there are lots of other contributors challenging us to heal our relationships, to be better listeners, to practice social justice and social change, and to stay close to our faith, and to have confidence in each other. In a way, this book is one long, I don't want to say meditation, collection of voices that challenge us when we don't think we can do it again to take another chance on each other.
So the Call to Unite, substantively speaking, so you're saying that this is a book that takes us into the stories and the testimonies, it sounds like, of sort of folks across the diverse tapestry of life in America, right? Are these just American stories, by the way, or these?
When we did the show, we did a 25-hour live stream in John and April last year, just at the beginning of the lockdown, just at the beginning of the pandemic of disease. And when we did that show, we had 25 hours. We had people from all over the world, from all parts of Africa, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, all telling stories of what they were doing, what they believe, what their gift is to uniting us in response to the disease.
Hmm.
For this book, this is focused on the United States. We couldn't include some great people like Yo-Yo Ma or the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. Why? Because you can't put dance in a book, right? You can't put a cello performance in a book. But those folks are at the Unite.us website. The Dalai Lama, Archbishop Tutu, the Patriarch of Constantinople, the head of the Orthodox Church. All those folks are both on the website and some of them also in the book. So this book is, in a sense, for folks who are a little bit, not just in their heads, but maybe in their hearts, a little bit in pain. I think Reverend Rick Warren says in the book, John, he says, we've endured a tsunami of grief.
Yeah.
And his response is, be gentle on yourself. Take it easy. Be gentle on others. We've all been through. I mean, I'm sure the three of us, but I'm sure all the listeners can say, yeah, that's me. I've lost a person. I've lost a friend. I've lost a job. I've lost a relationship. I've lost a dream. I lost an anniversary. I lost a wedding. I mean, the list of, the pain points we've all experienced is so extensive, and it is such a chance for us to reconnect in a new way with a little more tenderness and a little more gentleness. That's why I think the book is so lovely, because you can put it at your bedside table. The chapters are mostly just a page, maybe two, for those of us that don't like long books. John, I know you read lots of long and very heady books, but there are some of us who like the short
I buy long books, and then they look good on the bookshelf.
I'm guilty of that one too. But this is one that you can kind of put on your coffee table or on your bedside table, and you just when you need it, you pick it up, and there's a friend you haven't met yet offering you a chance to delve a little more deeply into a practice or an idea that might help.
But a little question for you then, before we jump to April, and that is, with the stories that the book tells, is what the reader receiving aphorisms, pieces of wisdom, sort of insights in terms of how I can practice, internal compassion, self-care, love for my neighbor, etc. Or is there sort of, would you say, a through line through the stories told in this book that point to the emergence of a larger movement and social shift? Because you started off by saying that we think of the voices that seek to unite us in this country and perhaps beyond as being few and far between. But, the three of us wouldn't be here on this call if it wasn't a heck of a lot more than just the three of us and even the folks you likely profile in the call to unite.
Well, I think the truth is it's definitely an invitation to join a movement. I mean, there are so many organizations, our two organizations, both of our organizations are very small, but we're part of hundreds of organizations that are trying to build up a new wave of compassion, respect, dignity at the center, and then the vigorous exchange of ideas necessary to come up with creative solutions to the problems of our time that seem intractable, but aren't intractable. Okay, none of the problems we think of as being intractable are intractable. They're not. We just haven't found the solution to how to work together to solve them. So this is an invitation to a movement. But it's an intimate invitation, John. It's people sharing from their heart. Amy Grant, the great multi-platinum singer, talks about being anxious before making her contribution, that she would be made fun of if she shared her own practice. And then she shares it. It's stunning. It's a stunner, for me at least. When Tony Robbins writes in the book with his wife Sage about separation leading to invariably to suffering.
Yeah.
He writes about the path to healing this sense in which we feel we have to separate, not that we want to, but we almost have to because we can't trust anyone. That's a dead end. Unfortunately, I mean, sometimes it feels like the only choice we have, but it's a dead end. So the book is kind of a challenge to all of us to, we may have many identities, right? And I say to folks, don't change any of them, just add one. In addition to being whatever you are, whether your identity is religious or gender or ethnicity or political party, age, range, whatever, keep all those that you're proud of, that are important. You add one, be a uniter. Not because it's a brand, but because it's a way of framing the challenges of our time.
Wonderful. I really like that. Just add one. I I don't mean to be the bad cop here, but I have to ask just a couple. Um, I don't know. They're the first questions that come to mind for me, and maybe it's because I'm cynical. But I are there movements of it seems like it would be so great if we could just get everybody to be more compassionate, have everybody like be better, have everybody be more in touch with themselves, all that. But I'm interested in like, it seems like that never happens. And I'm curious if there are historical examples you would compare it to. And so we want to have another X.
Right.
And why is it so hard for us to, how do we make this sharp, right? How do we make this stand out and be the thing that people fight for rather than, I don't know, all the stuff that's easy to fight for that people fight about
Yeah.
all the time?
Well, I think it's easy to tell the story of history by telling the story of wars. But lurking right beneath the surface is the story of the transformational forces of compassion and change. I mean, you know, people would point to, I'm not a historian of India's great revolution, but it was a nonviolent revolution for the most part. People point to the civil rights movement in the 1960s, in particular in the United States, radical, massive change, not without people paying dearly with their lives even, but mostly carried on a platform of nonviolence, of using the power of witness, of truth telling without the underbelly of violence. I mean, I can point you, April, to another example that's lesser known, might be less interesting to people, but maybe it might be more interesting. In the year 1969, there were about 200,000 Americans living in institutions because they had an intellectual disability. Now, these are people who are locked up for life because of the way they were born. None of them, almost none of them, guilty of any crime, nothing. Many of them placed in an institution at birth. Now, within 10 years, almost all those institutions were either closed or empty. And that transformation was a transformation led by people with compassion. Now, I happen to have a front row seat for it through the Special Olympics movement. But I think of movements like Special Olympics, they're hidden from the political drama because they don't use hate to change us. They use encounter. They use, the shifting of metaphor, the shifting of story, the shifting of the paradigm. What happens when you see a child with Down syndrome in 1950? You see a person, want to hear the words? Defective.
Yeah.
What happens when you see a person with Down syndrome in 1980? You see a gold medal winner. Now, that's just a different story. That's just using a different means to transform the entire cultural meaning-making system by simply inviting people into an encounter with a different set of tools. So I think the stories of the ways in which we've changed, sometimes, people say positives are like Teflon and negatives are like Velcro. We cling to the stories of hatred and violence, maybe because it's an evolutionary thing. It helps us protect ourselves in the event that we're threatened again. And those stories in which compassion and love and openness and trust and deep, deep work, deep cultural work, social work, political work, dramatic, painful work, when those stories are guided by a depth of, I almost want to say, faith in one another, we kind of go, oh, those were nice, but we don't necessarily take them quite as seriously. I think that's a mistake. I think there are a lot of examples.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And I just want to say, because I have a lot of respect for you,
Uh-oh, what did I say?
No, I'm going to ask you sort of, basically, I'm bringing my own wrestlings with this to you because I know that you're another leader in our work. And just from the way that you speak and the life you've lived, it's really clear that you engage this stuff at a really deep level. So one of the things I've been trying to figure out is how do we, so it's interesting because each of the examples that you gave, so we can take them one by one. Gandhi's movement and the civil rights movement, I don't think we would call either of them a uniting movement, right? That people, I think, typically think of those as good winning out over evil. And it's not hard for people to think of that happening. And it's not hard to see that happen, right? Like people the different political narratives would say that that has happened at different times, sort of opposite times in the last 20 years or whatever. The one about people with intellectual disabilities is more persuasive to me, but that also is about bringing a group of people into the light, which is a narrative that America is used to, at least, like, we've seen that happen lots of times. What seems complicated about the kind of uniting that we're talking about is that it's like you've got to unite the people who are in favor of civil rights and the people who weren't, right? Like, and it seems sort of like, the way that I sometimes imagine this is that you have two friends. One of them is Justice, and the other one is this person who believes in things that don't, to you, represent justice. And so Justice is your friend named Justice. By the way, Kieran O'Connor, one of our frequent hosts, his middle name is Justice. You should, I recommend people tease him about that. But so your friend Justice is sort of saying, but what about that person? Are you sure you can trust them? And it feels like it pits our loves against one another. And so I'm interested in what it means to unite with people who, this is a kind of simple thing to say, but who are fighting against the good in your understanding of it. And what does it mean to try to lead a movement?
Again, I think we can look to examples. If you take the letter from a Birmingham City jail written by Dr. King, you will hear, at least I hear in that letter, no hatred for the people he so powerfully opposes and who he calls to account, right? So here's the misunderstanding, I think. I think people hear unite and they think, oh, that means everybody's happy together. That means everybody's in the circle together and we all agree, even if they're horrible people or those people, we can't let them in. This is not, maybe unite isn't even the right word, I dare say, because that's not what I mean by it. What I mean by uniting is seeing in your opponent ultimately the means, the vehicle by which you create the end of the opposition. And so at some level, Dr. King's letter, where he appeals on the basis of the shared faith of the people to whom he writes for a change of their hearts, is to me a classic example of the uniter kind of mentality at work. Not pushing that, not pushing me in order to push them out, but pushing dignity in so that everybody gets it. Now, it may sound subtle and excessively theoretical, but you can see a completely different energy in people whose ultimate goal, I was reading the other day a beautiful text, if your listeners have never heard of her, of Eddie Hillesum, who was a victim of the Holocaust, writing about the importance of, in some ways, helping God. I mean, it's a strange thing to say. Maybe many people don't have a religious faith who are listening, but she writes about this, in some sense, our need, the need she had to work on herself, even in the midst of facing what many would argue is the most horrific evil we've seen on, at least in the 20th century, if not in any century. So this is a person whose vision for the future includes ending the oppression, ending the carnage, but doesn't take as its means for doing that humiliating and excluding the people who are on the other side. Hard to do. Don't get me wrong. I don't think this is easy work. In some ways, this is why the strong heart is important here, because Bishop Tutu wrote just recently about, if you want to be a uniter, you have to risk the ire of people on your own side. Everybody thinks you have to risk the ire of people on the other side. You have to risk the ire of people on your own side. Why? Because you're going to tell them that you're going to take away what they hate. Now, imagine clinging to what you hate. And I think part of what we've got in our culture, because we have a hate-based media and political culture, we've been fed so much hate. This is going to sound shocking. We like it. We need it. We cling to it. Uniters are inviting us to try a different strategy. It's not to agree on everything. It's not to say those people I agree with. Those people I want to have a banquet with. Those people are lovely and wonderful. No, you can disagree profoundly, and we do. That's good. Hatred, contempt, not such a good means, in my view, and certainly violence.
Mm. So, Dr. King, you mentioned the letter from the Birmingham.
I took a chance talking about Dr. King around you. No, now take me to school. Am I in the right area?
No, man. Well, no, you absolutely are. I mean, just to tie it to April's observation about the tension between, on the one hand, citing the example of the nonviolent movement in the context of a moment within which we are, and you are certainly working towards something that we are calling unity. I just brings to my mind the fact that King described the objective, the goal of nonviolence as not seeking the humiliation or defeat of the opponent, but ultimately to be able to win his friendship so that we could be reconciled to one another. That's what the beloved community is, right? So the idea being that we are able to speak truth in nonviolent fashion, but in so doing, call forth, the better angels of the opposition, and to turn the opposition into friends, if that transformation can be affected.
Yeah.
And I think that part of perhaps what it is we are seeking to accomplish, sort of collectively in this movement space that is building up, Unite, Braver Angels, and beyond, is sort of developing perhaps something of the social message or vocabulary to be able to communicate the fact that, we are not trying to skip over the deep-seated reality of people's
Absolutely.
disagreements, right, to achieve some sort of generic handholding, but rather that, yes, we want unity and community, but that has to pass through sort of the fires of opposition, steeled by love, steeled by
That's
understanding.
Right. I think. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask you, though. A person could argue and say that, well, any time is a good time for that sort of attitude. Perhaps. Why now? Why is this either a moment of unique challenge and or opportunity for the work of Unite?
Well, I think what we're all seeing is that the old ways of building belonging, mostly either by ethnicity, by national origin, by religious affiliation, many of those systems don't work anymore. Many of the systems by which we found our safety as a part of an us are no longer a credible solution for many people, not for everybody, but for many people. And so the new us, and by the way, neuroscience will tell us human beings, we don't do well alone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we don't make it alone. We are our survival strategy is not brawn. It is not the best set of eyes or the sharpest teeth in the forest. Our survival strategy is that we use our brains as collectives to protect ourselves and advance our goals. Even infants, the failure to thrive diagnosis is when children can't attach, right? Their bodies literally don't do well. So we need each other. But the question for I dare say the world, but certainly for our country now, is what's the new us? If the old us was, Irish Catholics or people of color or Southern Baptists or whatever the group was, Rotarians, Lions, whatever. If those groups,
Yankees fans.
Okay, well, those hopefully they're gone. No, just kidding.
Let's not take this too far, right?
Yeah, no, let's not go to extremes. But I think what we're looking for now is a new us. It's why when people say, like, what's your vision of our country? People are stymied. They don't know how to describe the new us.
Right.
So this is a challenge, I think, brought on by good things. It's brought on by an increasing sense in which everybody does deserve. It's not just white men that deserve belonging. Everybody deserves belonging. It's not just men. It's not just this group or that group. It's an everybody moment. That's good news. But we haven't yet done the work to build the skills or the stories of an everyone future. And so we're hemorrhaging, we're tense, we're struggling. You can't take away my story and not give me a new one. So our communities, I think, are trying to tell a new story where everyone actually has a seat at the table, where there's a power dynamic that's shared, not oppressive. And that's a work in progress. And in some ways, like I say, there's a reaction against the loss of some of those cultural moorings of the past, but a new flowering of possibility that I think is very, very hopeful.
April, I know that you have an awesome question that you're ready to ask. One just popped into my head that I've never asked, maybe have not asked anybody, and I want to throw it at Tim just really quick. If you,
I can't wait. That sounds.
you don't mind. Well, no, because we spend a lot of time talking about the work of depolarization and reforging our shared sense of identity as Americans as a narrative project. And we talk a lot about the story that we have to tell. You and I have had these conversations at some length. But the question I just thought to ask, which seems like such an elementary question, is that if it is the case that we are looking to tell a story to the American people, and that Unite is looking to tell a story that gives us the opportunity to identify with one another in a way that doesn't obliterate our various levels of identity, whether religiously, politically, ethnically, et cetera, but adds a layer on top of that, right? And you said for us to think of ourselves as uniters, but I think an aspect of that from our work is to also think of what it means to be an American as something that brings all of these other pieces together, right, into a shared story. My question for you, though, is how do you feel that for yourself, Tim? Because I imagine that if you do feel a sense that you have an identity that is shared by folks who exist far outside of your immediate cultural and philosophical context, I get the sense that that clearly must be true of you. I would think that it was true for me and for April, but I don't oftentimes stop to ask somebody, I never stop to ask anybody, who is in the movement, leading it the way you are. How does that show up for you in the way you as an individual relate to your fellow Americans and so forth? Are you really able to sort of feel like you can identify with the evangelical, white rural conservative on the one hand, and the social justice oriented person of color and inner city community on the other hand? And if so, I take that whatever direction you want, but how does that manifest in your heart and in your internal life, if you will?
Well, it's a very big question.
It is. I'm famous for this.
I'll start by saying that you can't see the beauty, the goodness, the dignity of others from the outside. We don't all look the same. We don't all think the same. We're not all good. Certainly, most of us are not good a lot of the time. So you have to see from a different perspective to see the common humanity. You hear people, John, describe this when we talk, they use the language of, we have the same pain. What they're describing is your inner, in some ways, your heart, right? It's trying to see you from the point of view of your biggest hopes, your deepest desire, right? Not the thing that you say, look, I'm a Yankee fan. Okay, I mean, I'm a Red Sox fan. I can have fun with you on that. But deep down, what is me being a sports fan all about? It's wanting to be on a team. Now, you want to be on a team too. So we can talk to each other about, where did that come from? When did you feel it? As a little boy, did you ever think you were really on a team? Did you hunger for a team? When was the first time? So now we're talking not from the outside, but I would argue from the inside. So it takes me personally, sometimes, I get these practices from different contemplative and meditation coaches and teachers I've had over the years, to take a second look, a respect, like the roots of the word is to look again. And sometimes when I'm in the presence of someone who's driving me nuts, or someone who's just experienced I just can't identify with, I try to take a conscious decision to take a second look and try not to see the part of that person that's driving me nuts or making me irritated or making me think, how could they? What are they thinking? I mean, it's impossible to imagine that anybody would do what you're doing. My God. I try to take that second look. It doesn't excuse the behavior, and it doesn't make me agree with the behavior, but it gives me, I think, a little more understanding of the person. So my own life, I've spent, I don't know, 30 or 40 years trying to practice the contemplative arts, the art of being a self-witness so that you can see yourself and see others from a little bit of a distance. And I think that helps. And I think that's what average people, they don't have to, you have to be sitting on a cushion all day long or going to church, or other kinds of things to know this. Intuitively, we humans, I think, have this muscle that invites us to see in the other, look for the eyes of belonging, look for the eyes of desire, look for the eyes of love, look for the eyes of fear, and meet people from the inside out, not from the outside in. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I guess that's my practice. And it's given me over the years a chance to go places where I think some people would have said, wow, I can't believe you go there. I remember hearing that when I was young, teaching in a high school, that, oh, you teach at that high school. And I don't know, somehow it seemed to me that the place was just overflowing with beautiful young people, even if the externals to some of my peer group or my groups of background seemed quite forbidding.
No, that's right on target as far as I'm concerned. It was worth asking the question to get that answer.
So, thank you for the question. It shows a lot of vulnerability to even ask a question like that, and it's going to take these are. I think we're in a medium to long haul game, but we need small wins along the way. We need incremental gains. That's how movements start. All these, many movements historically for justice, as you point out, April, movements designed to overthrow a system of oppression or a system of injustice. They started small with people joining together, often in insignificant numbers, and with a sense in which their work seemed to others to be silly, almost absurd, maybe trivial. But it was holding the post in small numbers till you get to bigger numbers, until all of a sudden, that thing about social change, at the first phase, it's silly. In the second phase, it's obvious. And in the third phase, it was my idea. Something like that, I think we're kind of between the first phase and the second phase with this work, but it'll appear to some people to look at a social justice activist in Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or New York, and an evangelical person in a rural county in the Bible Belt as being just so oppositional as to be impossible to reconcile. I just don't think history tells us that's true. There's a path forward. We just have to work hard and take some chances on each other.
So to continue my role as bad cop today, which I'm not, it really isn't what I do.
I go from bad cop to tough cop, so this is good.
That's right. Maybe it's because I run a debate program. I like to be, contrarianism comes naturally.
Yeah.
What about, so you talk about a new us, and I have to admit the word, so I love your work. And again, I'm only asking you hard questions because of how much I genuinely respect.
Yeah. This is tough stuff.
Okay.
She's been waiting to drill you for a while too. That's the backstory.
Come on, bring it on.
So we can start with language. I have I like to, I don't know if this applies to all Reds, people who identify as conservative, but I have what I call red flags, which are when people use certain words, I'm like, and one of my words is unite. And it's because one of the, right after the 2016 election, I came to believe that the biggest philosophical, right, which is not to say lived experience, but philosophical difference between those who support President Trump and those who don't is particularism versus universalism. And what I mean by that is there was a sociologist who referred to people as anywheres and somewheres, people who are like, I am about a particular story, like I have particular ancestors, a particular ethnicity, I'm from this town, versus folks who are like, well, I belong anywhere. Everybody's a person. And and the odd thing, so I worked for Russ Outfit for a while at the New York Times, and he wrote a really good column on tribalism and the cosmopolitan. He said that there are these folks, one of the odd phenomena of our day is that there are these folks who believe they're not in a tribe because they're so cosmopolitan, but actually the cosmopolitans are a tribe, and they don't like it when you say certain things about how, like, maybe there is a moral answer and maybe there is a God who wants certain things and not other things and all of that. And I guess I would ask,
a good lead up here. I keep anticipating the question, and then you keep changing the narrative. So keep going.
I'm interested in what you think I'm going to ask, but
I have no idea now.
There are two questions. The first is, what if I don't want a shared story? What if I want my story? And what if I don't, like, I think part of the problem in creating a new us is that there's not, there are a lot of folks who really like the particular, and I'm one of them, and don't want to be subsumed into some universal, well, we're all people, we all have suffering, because, like, that's all true, but that is pretty paltry stuff to make an identity out of from some perspectives. And so I'm asking, what if I don't want a shared story? Like, what if that's not, doesn't appeal to me? Why do I have to unite with everybody?
Yeah, well, the clues a little bit in the language. You don't have to.
That's right.
Your identity, the idea that we're working on here is not subsuming your identity. It's not making you dissolve into a sea of nothingness into which your particularities, your beautiful convictions about things that matter, the people you love, the practices, the foods, the music. I don't want everybody to listen to the same music, eat the same foods, drink the same drinks, walk the same walks, play the same sports, follow the same teams. Even if everybody were a Red Sox fan, it might be a better world, but probably Yankee Stadium would be empty most of the season, and then we wouldn't have a league, right? So we actually need all the diversity. The unity is not about ending diversity, it's about making it safe. Unity is not about subsuming your identity, it's celebrating your identity, but not just yours. All I'm asking you to consider is that in celebrating your identity, you don't have to separate and become superior to other people's identity. That is unity. Your identity, safe, strong, capable of giving you meaning and purpose in life, until you say, mine is superior and I don't want to be with you. I don't want anything to do with you.
What if I say, I don't believe in, what if I say I believe in traditional marriage? I don't believe in gay marriage. Or what if I say, because this is the problem, right? Is that I find that the left in particular, and I don't actually know how you fall politically, so I'm not trying to define you, but there's this thing where we're tolerant of everything except intolerance. But the problem is that, as you undoubtedly know, right, there are certain, if you look at almost any serious religion or like philosophy, they say certain things are good and certain things are not good. And I don't want to, I think probably what you would say, not to put words in your mouth, but you've used the word dignity a bunch of times. And like the idea that everybody has dignity, I don't know about, or I at least would not defend philosophies that say there are people who don't have dignity. But I do think, and maybe this is about what kind of safety is safe, right? Like, is it safe to believe that, like, it's wrong to love somebody of the same sex? Which, by the way, isn't a thing I believe, but I certainly know people where, like, safe is one of these words that actually means it's safe as long as you have all the right views. As long as,
Well, look, so if you said, you take an issue like same-sex marriage, let's just say hypothetically you stand on one side of that issue and I stand on another. And there are billions of people on the planet who stand on both sides of that issue.
Totally.
Very, in a progressive left-wing coastal community like the one I live in, it's almost impossible to imagine that there's a lot of people who don't agree with the right and dignity of people to marry whoever they want. But let's be honest, a lot of people are still struggling with that issue. I think what a uniter, what we're looking for here, April, is a means for the conversation. A means. So let's say I really want to change your mind. Here's the strategy currently in use. You're a Neanderthal. You're a bigot. You're a horrible person. You believe in magical thinking. You follow some book that was written by people who didn't even know how to boil water. How could you be such a fool as to cling to those opinions?
You're doing a good job. Yeah.
Now, here are the chances that line of thinking will change your mind.
I'm pretty persuaded.
It's just not likely to work because contempt constrains change. Now, I could go to a more religious, you bring up the issue of faith. I could go to a more religious example this week. I don't know when people will hear this podcast, but this week we've just celebrated Passover and we'll soon celebrate the Christian high holy days in that language, where it's pretty clear in both celebrations that there's good and bad. I don't think that my point here is not that there isn't good and bad. I know enough to know there's good and bad because I know it in myself. Like I'm not going to run around saying there's nothing bad. I mean, all I have to do is look at my day and I can find 12 examples of myself making commerce with the not good sides of me. The question is what changes it? And in both of these celebrations, we have invitations to broadening the circle of inclusion as the means. In the Christian experience, you have this, so to speak, scapegoated sacrificial lamb who does not reply with hatred and exclusion. Right? And in the Jewish tradition, you have this admonition that follows the Exodus, that follows Passover, to constantly be prepared to welcome the stranger. 36 times in Torah. Welcome the stranger, welcome the stranger. You were a stranger. Now, in the gay rights debate, if I'm a progressive, you're the stranger.
Oh, really?
It's the way I see it. Now, if I listen to Torah, I have to figure out.
Not just folks who are gay, but actually me, somebody who's.
Oh, I'm just using the hypothetical that you're very, let's just say, opinionated.
Conservative, right.
Conservative on this issue, and I'm very liberal. We are strangers to each other. And I don't think you're going to convince me of your point of view, but I don't have to use your point of view as a reason to exclude you, not because I admit or accept your point of view, but because underlying my hope for change is a hope of treating you with dignity and welcoming you as the stranger and not meeting evil with evil, not meeting hatred with hatred. Dr. King, again, I know John's a scholar of this. Hatred cannot drive out hatred. It's as simple as that. And some people will say that's not true. Hatred can overcome hatred. And I just say, I don't agree. I don't think it works. On a practical basis, just as a problem solver, I don't think meeting hatred with hatred. So if I say, that's a hateful comment you've just said, April, I hate you for it.
Right.
We get what we got, which is not much. And if I say I find that comment to be deeply troubling and in some ways very counter to my principles, but I want to hear you, I want to understand you, tell me more, at least we've started down a road that has the possibility of change. I would argue changing you might argue changing me, but at least we're in the process, hopefully, of bringing each other into higher ground.
There are many people in the world and in society, certainly in political society, who likely believe that past a certain point, love is not necessarily the optimal vehicle for social change. But I do think that we're standing ultimately on a different point of view. The nonviolent stance is that love is a transformational social value.
That's right.
Among other
things. It's effective. It's actually effective.
Right.
Not as quick as killing someone else, if you want to get rid of them, if you want to change their minds. The short version of changing someone else is killing them. It sounds silly, but it's actually, Hannah Arendt wrote this after World War II. War is the excuse people have when they run out of other solutions. I'm bastardizing her language, but that's basically, When I've run out of solutions, I kill you. That's what you do. That's what, unfortunately, that's what human beings do. I can no longer find a way to solve this problem. I am going to kill you. Now, that's a shortcut to me winning if I have the bigger gun. It's not a problem-solving solution. And it, in my view, has very rarely, with a few maybe exceptions where people can make a pretty decent claim, it very rarely results in significant sustained change.
Well, this goes to what I'm driving at, because to put meat on the bones, or to continue to put meat on the bones of the philosophy that you and I think we are in various ways sort of either articulating or hinting towards, it seems that we have placed our bet on the idea that love has transformational social power beyond just being a sentiment or affection. But how can we love one another if we do not identify with each other on some fundamental level? Maybe not with one another's opinions, perhaps certainly not with one another's opinions in various contexts, but with some deeper sort of shared residency within the human condition, if you will. And so that's why I asked you the question earlier about sort of, how this manifests for you internally. And I think that, what you said was powerful, because we are, I think, in some way trying to link in people's minds the connection that exists between our internal disposition, just in, the way we exist in our minds and hearts day to day, and the very state of the world, right?
Yeah.
Because we're aiming towards something that is, you use the word unite, unity, but it's also, community, really,
Yes, it is.
I think the call to unite could just as easily be the call to commune. I imagine.
Yeah. I think that's right, John. The word, just to back to your point, April, about the word, I know I've got an organization called Unite.us, but I don't think we're there yet to know all the language we need. I really don't. We're a work in progress. And sometimes I hear people say unite, and I think, that's not quite right. It's not what I exactly mean, or not what we're trying to get at. And sometimes I hear the, braver angels. That sounds good. And then other times I'm like, oh, angels, I'm not sure it's exactly right. So I think we're all getting close to a common story, a common work. I know you guys both are interested in religious traditions. Not everybody is, but I go back to Isaiah, the prophetic voice, who invites us, and this is to your point, John, to practice certain baby steps. Offer your clothing, feed the poor, clothe the naked. And then he says in his writing, we think it's a he, I assume, for better or for worse, I assume, that you will be known as a repairer of the breach. Not that you'll be known as a great philanthropist. Not that you'll have a brick on the wall of your church or synagogue or art gallery or school, but you'll be known as a repairer of the breach. So what I hear in that ancient wisdom is practice community. We're not going to solve every problem tomorrow, but we can take practices. This is what the book has got, so many beautiful examples of people giving their advice for how to take baby steps in building a fabric. It's almost like we're weaving here, right? And so the three of us are weaving each other a little bit closer together, we hope. A little bit of practice, a little bit of stronger relationship, a little bit of deeper understanding, a little bit more trust, so that when we get to more difficult problems, we have that to draw upon. And we will get to difficult problems. That's
not the hard part. Yeah.
That's the nature of humanity. Well, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, they get to difficult moments. And the question at those moments is, on what practices can we draw to try to heal and transform the difficult moments? We're at a difficult moment now, and I'm afraid to say our practice kit is a little bit depleted. The old practices aren't working so well, which is why so many, like why you guys are doing such a great job organizing people with new practices. Practice belonging, practice community. It's not an idea. It's a practice.
And if we can unite around the need for those practices and disciplines, I imagine, we'll get a little closer towards weaving the the community of angels that we want to see. I'm sorry, I just wanted to hit all of the depolarizing words.
Oh my gosh.
That's why we have you. That's why we have you, Mr. Wood. We have you here to keep our language clear and crisp and articulate and somehow united.
There you go. There you go.
There we go.
Indeed. We're down to our last several minutes, but April, do you want to sneak in another pointer
Zinger?
question? Yeah, another zinger on
No, I'm done grilling you. I would ask, so how do we go from, I love your notion of practice. I think that's exactly right. How do we go from like how can we actually change the world is basically my question, because the forces of polarization are really, really strong. And it's all well and good to like, I mean, mindfulness has exploded, at least in the coastal urban world, and religion ain't so small in the other parts. So it's, you know, there are people naming these practices, and yet we are in one of the more divided moments that our country's history has ever seen. And I don't see the bad stuff slowing down. And I'm curious, like, what gives you hope? What makes you think that like we actually can be big enough, be strong enough, reach enough people, compel them forward enough that particularly given, I liked your mention of pain earlier, only because I really do think that's what drives a lot of stuff. And how do we, and you know, better to be in this fight to heal the world than the other one. But what makes you think it can work?
Well, I think, first of all, I think you're right that practices like mindfulness, social and emotional learning, which is a field, you know, I'm very proud to have played a part in helping to birth, is changing schools at a rapid pace, but we got a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of catching up, and there's a lot of kids we've lost over generations, not just over the last few years. So these are tidal shifts, right? And they don't happen instantly, but I think the trend line is actually very, very hopeful. And I think even now in the last few weeks, the changes in attitudes about vaccination, it's a small thing maybe, but it's a big thing. Why? Because you see Presidents Obama and Bush, you see President Clinton and Carter. Why are you seeing them? Because a little organization like ours created something called the COVID Collaborative to ask people to be healers of the breach, work together, join forces, and send shared messages. Scientists, political figures, educators, surgeons general, presidents, and young people all sending messages together. It's a small step. It's a baby step. But I think the trend line invites us to build those steps. We are in there's another force, as you point out. I was about to say a battle. I don't like military metaphors if I can avoid them for this kind of work. So I think we're in a struggle for whose story is going to win. I look at the last year, I look at the essential workers, I look at those nurses and doctors, I look at those truck drivers and custodians, I look at those postal workers and the grocery store clerks, and I think to myself, oh my God, it makes me cry to think of how generous they were.
You bet.
And
you bet.
I'm not willing to accept the version of our country that I can tune into tonight on cable news. It's just not, to me. I'm gonna use strong language. If you think that's the truth, I believe it's a lie, because it appears to be the whole story. It's not. It's not the whole story, and I refuse to accept it as the dominant version of us. So I'm hopeful that your work, our work, books like this, The Call to Unite, don't buy the book to get a theory. Don't read the book, even if it's just a page at a time, in order to get a new idea. Read it to allow your heart to open up a little bit and to see what's often right in front of us, which is the breathtaking hunger of every one of us. Yes, April, to your point, to have your own place where you belong, but in that place to feel safe and a part of a larger whole that doesn't threaten you, but celebrates you. I think that's a story we can tell, and it's our challenge to do it together.
Amen, Brother
Thank
Tim.
you.
We appreciate
you.
that. Let folks know, how can they support the work of Unite.us?
So we're at unite.us. Come visit us, check out the videos, check out the projects that are there, the COVID projects, the people's commissions we're building around the country to bring law enforcement and community activists together. And get the book. Part of this, the book, all the proceeds go to the cause, so there's no personal profit in this. But the reason to push so hard on these ideas, these books, is to make people see that there is a market, that we do have a voice, and so go on your Amazon or wherever you buy and enter a comment. Just say 3 words, why? Because then people will see, wow, look at all the interest in hope. Look at all the momentum around awakening. Look at all the positivity bursting out around us and the possibilities that brings for even having good conversations about marriage equality or marriage inequality that April and Tim had. Wow. I mean, I think he should have been stronger. I think she should have been stronger. He should have said, but look at that conversation. It was a part of a change, and that's what we need to all join in. So unite.us, Amazon, grab a copy of the book, give it to someone as a gift. If you've broken off a relationship with someone on the other side of one of these divides, send them the call to unite just to let them know you haven't given up.
There you go. Well, we encourage folks to do so. And as always, if you are supportive of the work of Braver Angels and you are not yet a member, feel free to join us as one at braverangels.org. Like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We are building a house united. Until next time. Thank you, folks.